All right, hello everyone and welcome. If you've ever felt like classical conditioning is just this big, confusing puzzle, well, you are in exactly the right place. In the next few minutes, we're going to put all those pieces together so you can walk away from this feeling like you've absolutely mastered it.
I know. This whole alphabet soup of terms, the NS, the US, CS, and CR, it can feel pretty overwhelming. But I promise you, by the end of this little session, you're going to see the simple, beautiful logic behind it all. It's actually way more straightforward than you think. So let's just dive right in.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the big idea that kicked this whole thing off, behaviorism. Then we'll get to the fun part and meet Pavlov's famous dogs. And of course, we'll decode that alphabet soup of terms. After that, we'll see how this stuff connects to our own emotions. And finally, we'll look at how these learned connections can actually be broken.
Okay, first things first. To really get a grip on conditioning, we have to start with the school of thought it was born from, and that is behaviorism. Now, the core idea here is actually pretty simple, but for its time, it was revolutionary. It was this: psychology should only study what we can actually see and measure.
So what does that really mean? Well, behaviorists basically said, look, you can't put a thought or a feeling under a microscope. So they decided to focus only on what they could observe: a stimulus, something happening in the environment, and the behavioral response that came after it. It was all about making psychology a much more objective, hardcore science.
And the main champion of this whole movement was a guy named John B. Watson. In this landmark paper from 1913, he basically threw down the gauntlet. He argued that psychology needed to stop asking people how they feel and instead focus on one thing and one thing only: how to predict and control behavior.
Now, Watson didn't just pull these ideas out of thin air. He was super influenced by the work of a Russian physiologist who made a discovery that would become, without a doubt, one of the most famous experiments in the history of psychology. And here's the wild part. It was a total accident. Ivan Pavlov wasn't even trying to study learning. He was a physiologist, and his whole thing was studying digestion in dogs. But he started noticing something odd. The dogs would start salivating before the food even got to them, maybe when they just heard his footsteps coming down the hall. And that's when he realized he'd stumbled onto a really fundamental form of learning.
This one diagram right here, it captures his entire groundbreaking experiment. You can see it's broken down into 3 phases. In the before conditioning part, you've got 2 separate things going on. Then, during conditioning, those 2 things get linked together. And finally, after conditioning, boom, a brand new connection has been formed. We're about to break down every single piece of this.
Okay, here we go. This is the part you absolutely need to nail for your exam. Let's decode this alphabet soup once and for all. If there's one section you're going to want to pay super close attention to, this is it right here.
First up, we have the neutral stimulus, or NS, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's neutral. Think of it as a complete blank slate. Before the experiment, that bell is just some random sound to the dog. It doesn't naturally make it salivate. It means nothing. At least, not yet.
Next, we have the unconditional stimulus, or US. The key word here is unconditional, which is really just a fancy way of saying unlearned. This is the thing that naturally, automatically triggers a response without any training whatsoever. You don't have to teach a dog to want food, right? That response is just built in.
And that automatic reaction? That's our unconditional response, or UR. Again, it's unconditional because it's an unlearned, natural reflex. So the unconditional stimulus, the food, leads to the unconditional response, the salivation. That connection is just hardwired from day one. No learning required. So let's put it all together now. Just follow the flow here. Before anything starts, the bell, our NS, does absolutely nothing. Then, during conditioning, Pavlov repeatedly pairs the bell, the NS, with the food, the US, which naturally causes that salivation, the UR. After doing this again and again and again, well, that's where the magic happens. After conditioning, the bell all by itself is enough to make the dog salivate.
So the crucial takeaway here, the absolute secret sauce to this whole process, is that repeated pairing. That's the moment where the learning happens. By consistently presenting that neutral bell right before the unlearned stimulus of the food, the dog's brain literally forges a new connection. And that constant pairing is what transforms the bell. It's not neutral anymore. It has now become a conditioned stimulus, or CS. And here's an easy way to remember it. Conditioned just means learned. The dog has now learned that the bell predicts that food is coming. And finally, the dog's salivation in response to just the bell is now called the conditioned response, or CR. Now, this is a super important point, so listen close. Notice that the behavior itself, salivating, is the exact same as the unconditioned response. What's changed is the trigger. It's now a learned response to the bell, not a natural, automatic one to the food.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. Because this isn't just about dogs drooling. These exact same principles are constantly at work, shaping our own complex human emotions and reactions every single day, often without us even realizing it.
So John Watson, he decided to take Pavlov's ideas and see if he could apply them to human emotions. And this led to his infamous, and by today's standards, deeply unethical, Little Albert experiment. His goal was to prove that a complex emotion like fear could actually be conditioned, just like a simple reflex.
Let's break this one down using the exact same terms we just learned. Okay, so the neutral stimulus was a white rat. At first, little Albert had no fear of it at all. The unconditional stimulus was a loud, scary noise made by hitting a steel bar. The baby's natural, unconditional response was, of course, fear and crying. So after Watson repeatedly paired the rat with the noise, the rat itself became the conditioned stimulus, triggering the conditioned response of fear, all on its own.
And the effect didn't just stop with the rat. This fear generalized. Albert started to show fear towards other similar furry objects, a rabbit, a dog, even a Santa Claus mask with a cotton beard. His conditioned fear had spread to a whole category of new stimuli. And this helps explain how a specific fear can sometimes broaden into a more general phobia.
Now, while most conditioning takes a lot of pairings, there's a really powerful exception that I bet we've all experienced. Food aversion. If you eat something and then you get sick, even hours later, you can develop a lifelong hatred for that food after just one bad experience. It's actually a powerful survival mechanism our bodies have evolved to protect us from poison.
So, we've seen how these incredibly powerful associations get built. But are they permanent? What happens when that learned link isn't reinforced anymore? Is it possible for these connections to be broken? Let's take a look.
This graph shows you the entire life cycle of a conditioned response. So look at that first section labeled acquisition. As the bell and the food are paired over and over, you can see the strength of the response goes up and up and up. That's the learning phase. But then, look what happens in the next phase.
This next process is called extinction. And looking back at that graph, you see the response strength just plummets. This happens when you start presenting the conditioned stimulus, the bell, all by itself, over and over without the unconditional stimulus. So if Pavlov kept ringing the bell but never brought any food, eventually the dog would stop salivating. The bell no longer predicts food, so that learned association starts to fade away.
So the main takeaway here is that this isn't just some abstract theory for a psychology test. These principles are running under the surface of our lives constantly. You know, the little jingle of an ice cream truck that suddenly makes you feel happy, or a specific notification sound on your phone that gives you a jolt of anxiety, or the smell of a hospital that just makes you feel uneasy. Those are all conditioned responses. So the question I want to leave you with is this. What kind of unconscious, learned associations might be shaping your life every single day?